Herod the Great was an unscrupulous, murderous madman who transferred his allegiance to Octavian after Octavian defeated Mark Antony. Octavian became known as Augustus, Caesar of Rome, and Herod was granted rule over Judea and crowned king of the Jews. But Herod was paranoid in his position of power. To protect his crown, he killed 2 of his sons, murdered his wife, and he ordered every baby boy in a nearby town under the age of 2 executed. Caesar joked that it was preferable to be Herod's pig than his own son. But even on his deathbed, Herod's will was to be king. So he divided his kingdom between his 3 remaining sons. But the emperor of Rome would not confirm his will. No one would receive the title of king. The sons were only granted rule over the territories. Caesar still held the power. Under Roman rule, it was policy to allow a large measure of local freedom to the people of the empire. But the Jews were increasingly uneasy under their pagan rule of Rome and yearned for the independence that they once enjoyed. One incompetent leader after another added to the unrest, as did a system of tax collection. Native Jews, called publicans or tax collectors, were given concessions to collect taxes for Rome and any additional amounts they could extort for themselves. Jews who became rich in such fashion were despised and considered outcasts because they collected tax on everything. They set up toll booths where the roads crossed, collecting on all import, all export, all items bought, and all items sold. They set tolls on the roads and tolls on the bridges, tolls on the harbors. They set tolls on how many axles were on your wagon, and they probably taxed the legs on the donkey pulling it. But you get the idea. You name it, it was taxed. But it is here, at one of these dirty little intersections in a dusty toll booth counting axles for some untitled king, when the King of Kings walks by and says, "Follow me." Jesus sometimes picks the most unlikely, seemingly incapable men to further the message. We so often imagine the apostles to be stained glass saints with some kind of holy perfection that has eluded the rest of us. All of them basically unqualified for the task. And yet these common, sometimes callous men were entrusted with spreading the gospel. The Lord uses strong, bold leaders like Peter to take charge, initiate, plan, strategize, confront, command, and make some horrible mistakes. He uses humble, gentle, inconspicuous souls like Andrew who seek no prominence but quietly bring people to Christ. He uses zealous, passionate, uncompromising, ambitious men like James, as well as tender, people-oriented truth seekers like John. He can even use a skeptical, analytical, mechanical, slow-witted, weak faith, visionless, pessimistic, insecure man like Philip. And he picks a social outcast and a traitor to his people named Matthew from a toll booth in Capernaum. To be a tax collector meant as a Jew, you were used by the government to collect taxes from your own people. You worked for the oppressor. You were a first-class traitor. And there's a pretty good chance the other apostles wouldn't have liked Matthew at first. So when Matthew puts his name in the list in Matthew chapter 10 and verse 3 and says, "Matthew the tax collector," it stands out. No other disciple in the list is associated with their job. This isn't something to be proud of. A tax collector was despised. But maybe we're getting a glimpse at Matthew's humility and his sense of unworthiness, for he sees himself as a vile sinner. And it may be why Matthew never speaks. He never asks a question. He never makes a comment. He never appears in an incident. He is absolutely faceless and voiceless through the entire narrative of the gospel. And so he is silent until the Spirit asks him to pick up the pen and write about his king. If you were going to write a biography, it is very doubtful that you begin with a genealogy. If you took a list of seemingly meaningless names to a publisher and you showed them that first draft, I believe it would be sent back to you with drool stains on it and a polite no thank you. Such historical niceties are for footnotes, fine print at the bottom of the page or the back of the book. But Matthew didn't think so. And after reading the opening words, a record of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, son of Abraham, well, his readers didn't think so either. The implications of that sentence are the climax of all Old Testament expectation. But it's been 400 years since the last book of the Old Testament. And Matthew breaks 4 centuries of silence with an announcement of a 4,000-year-old promise of a son. For first century scriptural literate Jews, the proposal to set forth an account of the son of David, it would have to be authenticated. All that might promise of restored kingship or the son of Abraham with these rich allusions to the seed, it needs to be verified. That first sentence meant blessing not only to all of Israel, but to the nations of the earth. This isn't just some history lesson on Jesus. It is the origin of the Christ. Turn, if you will, to your Bibles to Matthew chapter 1. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob. Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. And Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon. Nahshon the father of Solomon, and Solomon the father of Boaz by Rahab. And Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. And David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah. And Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, and Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah, and Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah, and his brothers at the time of deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azar, and Azar the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Mathan, and Mathan the father of Jacob, Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, whom was born Jesus, who is called the Christ. I remember hearing that passage as a boy, and you got to lay down in the pew. It's kind of boring. But we must not see it as such. We must not see it as just a drawn-out list of names. It is an announcement. It is the identity. It is the revelation of the identity of the King. I was having lunch one day with a Jewish man, and I got up the nerve to ask him why he did not believe that Jesus was the Son of God. Defiantly, he told me, because it could have been anybody, Caleb. Pick one. But that is the disbelief Matthew is refuting both then and now. You cannot pick one because there has always been one. He was picked from the beginning. The publican is presenting the promised king, the one that was prophesied for generations to Abraham, to Jacob, to David, to Micah, to Daniel. They were told the tribe, they were told the time, and they were told the town. It can all be traced from the royal line. There can only be one, and this is the one. And Matthew paints his king in royal colors. It all begins with the family tree. If a king is to be heralded as king, if he is to be believed as king, in order to have any credibility, then it must start with the proof. And the pedigree was proof of the promise. Several years ago, my brother and I decided to pool our money together and purchase a champion hunting dog. We contacted a few breeders around the state, and we ended up finding one up in Gladwin. When we got there, the breeder handed us, and we drove out in the middle of nowhere after dark. When we got there, the breeder handed us the dog's papers. The problem was, we'd never had a dog with papers before, so we have no idea what we're looking at. So in the dark forest with only a flashlight, we began to read this long list of meaningless names. And most of the names were in red. And if you know anything about pedigrees, red signifies champion. The puppy was descended from a royal line, and the pedigree was the proof. Matthew gives his readers a pedigree as proof that Jesus descends from royalty. There was a royal line in Israel, and it came through David. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, God said through the prophet Nathan to David that it would be through the loins of David that the king would come. And that was never fulfilled under Solomon, so they waited and waited for one to be born of the seed of David to fulfill this prophecy. And so if Jesus is to be king, it must be established that he has the right to reign because he descends from the genealogy of royalty. And that's precisely what those opening verses represent. Matthew leads with it, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David. Our contemporary use of Jesus Christ is a name, but Christ is a title. It means anointed one. It reflects royal status. When Jesus saw Christ, the Son of David, this was no longer just a genealogical pedigree. Matthew has suddenly transformed a dull recital into a thought-provoking introduction of the gospel. And that crucial turning point is not only the mention of Christ, but the mention of David, King David. When the monarchy was destroyed and what was left was transported into Babylonian exile, no heir sat on the throne. But now Matthew is arguing a descendant of David, Jesus the Messiah, has come to take the reign forevermore. In this genealogy, we have what is called a descending record. A descending record comes right down from Abraham and David all the way through Joseph to Jesus. Jesus' genealogy is also recorded in the 3rd chapter of Luke, but that genealogy is in the reverse. It is an ascending genealogy. It starts with Jesus and it goes all the way back through Adam. One begins with Jesus and the other ends with Jesus. It goes both ways and it comes out the same in the end. Any way you slice it, God is saying, this is my son, heir to the throne. Now there's some distinctions between the two genealogies, Luke and Matthew. Matthew is showing the legal. Matthew is showing the legal descent of Jesus as the King of Israel. Luke is showing the lineal descent. In other words, Matthew shows us the royal line where Luke shows us the bloodline. The difference is this. The royal line always passed through the father. But Jesus had no human father. Remember, it's a virgin birth. Through Joseph, he has the right to reign that belonged to David. Even though Joseph was not his father, in terms of actuality, he was his legal father. Matthew follows the royal line through David, or King David and King Solomon, David's son. But David had another son, Nathan. And Mary's line, Jesus' mother, came through Nathan. So what you have is one line coming down through David and Solomon, and the other one coming down through David and Nathan. Through Nathan you come to Mary, and through Solomon you come to Joseph. He is the actual seed of David through Mary. He is the legal heir of David through Joseph. But look at verse 16 again. It says, and Jacob begot Joseph, the husband of Mary. It doesn't say the father of Jesus. Joseph was not the father of Jesus in a human way. He was the husband of Mary. He was not born of Joseph. He was born of Mary. He was Joseph's child legally with all the rights and privileges, and he was Mary's child lineally and by blood. And so every possible way, Jesus Christ had the right to rule. The father was the one that granted the royal line, and the mother was the one who granted the royal blood. But this king had to be more than a king of royalty, but a king of rescue. Matthew's genealogy mentions 4 women, and most genealogies, Jewish genealogies, would not include women. And more importantly, the choice of these particular women, instead of such great matriarchs like Sarah, Rebecca, and Leah, it proves Matthew's given us more than mere biographical information. Tamar seduced her father-in-law into an incestuous relationship. Rahab saved the spies and joined the Israelites, but she was a pagan prostitute. Ruth was a Moabite, not only a Gentile, but a member of a race frequently in opposition to the Israelites. And Bathsheba, though a Jew, she entered into the Messianic line because of an adulterous affair. And readers steeped in the Old Testament, they'd call to mind these images associated with these names. And the mention of these women would have infuriated legalistic Jews. They wanted glory. Matthew gives them guilt. The kings, princesses, and puppies of this world proudly display their noble pedigrees, their links with dukes and duchesses, presidents, and prime ministers. But Matthew goes to lengths to show that this king included in his heritage pagans and prostitutes. They were looking for an earthly king to rise up and conquer. They got a king that was elevated to a cross. Jesus said, when I am lifted up, I will draw all men unto me. You have a king that cares and came to save. You have a king that came to save not only Jews, but men and women without racial distinction, fulfilling the promise of Abraham, that in him all the nations of the earth will be blessed. You have a king whose pedigree tracks the Bible's entire storyline as son of Abraham, son of David, son of God. The opening verses of Matthew are an announcement for all to hear. The king has arrived in perfect fulfillment, not only to rule, but to rescue. And it is all recorded from the pen of a publican. Matthew dropped everything when Jesus said, "Follow me." Doesn't make a whole lot of sense. He was wealthy and well-connected. But at a crossroad in Capernaum, he made a decision to follow, and it cost him everything. He lost his job, his position of power, his wealth, his connections. History tells us that later that would cost him his life. But it didn't matter to Matthew, because one day, while sitting in a toll booth on a dusty road owned by an untitled king, walked the King of Kings with an eternal life-giving crown. A common tax collector recorded the Christ so that we might recognize our King and receive his crown. This evening, if you're sitting at the dusty crossroad of your life, feeling all too common, way too sinful, and completely unqualified, then Jesus would tell you the same thing he told Matthew: follow me.